Hello, everybody. This is Andy Grant. I want to welcome you again to another episode of Real Men Feel. Well, if you haven't joined us before, it might be your first episode of Real Men Feel. So whether you're brand new, whether you've been here for a long-time listener, thanks for coming. We're glad to have you. Real Men Feel is produced live every Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern. You can always join us live at realmenfeel.org/show. You can also subscribe, listen, and review to the podcast at realmenfeel.org/iTunes. We go for about 30 to 40 minutes. Your comments, your feedback, participation, all welcome during the live show, as well as anytime in our Facebook group or at realmenfeel.org. Everything mentioned in this show, links and people and resources will be included in the show notes, which you can find on the blog at realmenfeel.org. And this show is a little unique. We've got a lot of invited guests, but first let's start off with the man who's always the guest without necessarily being invited, whatever that means. But my co-host and friend Alpio Hunter.
Hey, at times it feels like I'm a guest. Other times, hey, just good to be here. Period.
Cool. So this week, in case people aren't aware of it, there's a presidential election happening in the United States right now, and This is really it's our last live show before Election Day. And even though lots of states can do early voting now, which I think is really new, I don't recall early voting where I live in Massachusetts before this year. So I think this is a very new concept. A lot of people are already voting. I'm waiting to miss kind of the thrill and pomp and kids selling cookies that Election Day in America brings. But so since it's our last show before the election, I really wanted to give a space, since Real Men Feel is all about making a space to allow and encourage men to feel. I wanted to make a space where people are allowed to share what they're feeling about the election. So not necessarily pros and cons and issues and policy, but just what this rather bizarre election year has brought up in each of us. So I've invited both men and women to partake in this discussion, and we're going to see what happens. So first, I would like to introduce Shauna Pelton.
Hey.
Hi, Shauna. You want to tell the folks a little bit about you?
Oh, sure. I'm happy to. Well, first of all, thank you, Andy, for inviting me on. I'm really happy to be here and share in this incredible conversation with all of you. So my name is Shauna Pelton. I am a metaphysical healer and transformational coach. I'm passionate about human growth and potential. And I'm all about positive personal change, especially as it relates to emotional mastery and mindset and spiritual healing as well. So, I'm happy to chime in about how I see what's going on emotionally with this campaign.
Super. Well, I'll get a chance to that. Let's move on to our next guest. Anthony Simeone has been a prior guest on the show and is a regular blogger at realmenfeel.org. So welcome, Anthony.
Hi, Andy. Thanks once again for having me on. And yeah, I'm a blogger, writer, speaker, hero advocate. I like to call myself. I started a personal development program that I call Live the Hero. And it's all about how we can use Joseph Campbell's theory of the hero's journey to make an adventure of our everyday lives and find our own purpose rather than waiting for the universe or some other force, whatever you believe in the universe, to bring our purpose to us. When you make your own purpose, make your own fate, make your own path in life, and see every day as truly an adventure in your life. So that's my mission going forward.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that mission, and thanks for joining us tonight. Next up, Lori Grant. I think I am familiar with her. For anyone that doesn't realize it, Lori Grant is my wife, and I'll let you tell what today is, Lori.
Oh, I wasn't even going to share that. Okay.
Oh, you gotta.
So I'm Lori Grant, and I am a life coach and a certified energy medicine practitioner. So I specialize in boundaries and holding our own space and making sure we don't invade anybody else's space and that ours doesn't get invaded. So this election series has call it a series. I don't even know why. A season, I guess. It seems like it's been a very long season. Has really brought a lot up for everybody. So I'm quite excited to share tonight. And today is Andy and my anniversary as well. So
Happy anniversary.
Happy anniversary.
But that's not the only reason she's invited. All right? Make that clear. She would have been here regardless.
That's true. She's always here.
always, you're just stuck with me. So that's what I'm all about. I mean, I'm about a lot more than that, but that's for this evening. That's what I'm about.
Cool. Thanks for joining us. And last but not least, I'd like to introduce Ken Russell.
Well, thanks, Andy, and thanks, Shauna, for proposing my name for this really very fascinating approach to what I think we all agree has been a fascinating season. I'm a life coach, and I'm a business coach and consultant. I work with people in transition, going from one place to someplace else, which is everyone all the time. But it requires a certain amount of understanding that that's what's going on for coaching to be at all effective. And those are my favorite clients. So I really appreciate the opportunity to share some feelings this evening, and I'm really looking forward to how this will all unfold.
Cool. Well, thank you, Ken, and thanks for everybody again for making the time to have this place and raise these issues and share everyone's feeling. Since this is a historic election with a major party's first nomination of a female candidate, I'll start off with Shauna for no particular reason, except that you are also a female non-candidate.
Yeah.
So what's been showing up for you, Shauna?
Well, so actually, at the beginning of the year, I was finding myself to be quite triggered during just, regular debates and listening to how people were unconsciously treating the female candidate, as well as what their reflections were on her. And so, it brought in my own personal, I recognized almost like this self-defense mechanism, like this internal reaction process. And then I also found myself to be quite triggered by the opposite, candidate. That I actually had to sit with, and I think it's important. This is actually what I really want to, the importance of this subject of recognizing when you feel a certain way, no one makes you feel, right? So I had to really sit with, well, why? Why am I feeling the way that I'm feeling? Why am I losing my cool, my energy, my life force, giving it over to an opinion that I have about someone, right? And what I realized is that it brought up, and not just for me, but in talking to other people, other women, I should say, it brought up these old memories of how we as women experience being treated by men, the majority of men in our society. And so, I found that when I really sat with why I was viscerally reacting to this man candidate, that was it. And because of the behaviors that we all know about, that I don't need to get into or even justify as right or wrong, but just, again, putting it back on myself. And I think this is what the opportunity is, because as a healer and coach in this area, our emotions are our guidance scale, right? And it tells us what needs to be looked at, what part of us needs to be healed. And so I took it as that opportunity. So I'm no longer reactive as I was once before, because I did my healing work around it and I was grateful. And I'm able to look at it in a different way and see it from a bigger viewfinder, right? From a different, broader perspective, and what it means collectively for us to have this opportunity, potentially, for a female to be our leader. But I do think that this is the biggest issue that we all have, this issue of, old stuff that is coming to the surface, and the opportunity to really look at it intimately to heal. So I don't know if anyone else has that same reflection or had that awareness, but for me, it was about that female collective consciousness, the old wounds that we all had. Well, I shouldn't say we all, but a lot of women have and carry with them because of this, imbalance in the masculine and feminine energy. So seeing it as a real chance for us to up-level our collective consciousness here.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Fascinating.
Did that resonate with you, Lori, or anybody else?
Well, it's interesting. I just want to, I find it intriguing because one of my big triggers was actually, I would get so frustrated with Hillary as opposed to with Donald. And I had to really dig into what my issues were around a strong woman.
Mm-hmm.
And why did I get so frustrated that she was so strong and powerful and holding her space, because she wasn't really going on the attack, right? So my whole thing was like, if she was being attacked, why wouldn't she attack back? And she didn't. And she would stick, during the debate, she would stick to policy. And I would be like, what? That's not okay, right? Like she's not doing it quite right. And I had to really dig into, like Shauna, I very much turned it back to, what the hell's going on with me, that how she's doing it isn't the right way, right? Like why she's got all this power, she's got all this strength, and yet I'm still upset with her because I'm triggered, because obviously strong, powerful women, there's something within me that is triggered by that. Like what's appropriate, what isn't. And I know I have some issues around, I'll just put it out there, I have issues around men being better, right? I was raised in a family of all men. I had my mom, but I have 5 brothers. So I have this big issue. So it clearly was just coming right back and mirroring to me so boldly. And I really had to dig in and be like, oh crap, there it is again. So that's what came up for me, as opposed to, I have my other issues with his behavior, but a lot of it was, oh my gosh, that's my stuff about the man compared to the woman. Again, what we're raised with, my generation still struggles with men are supposed to do and be and et cetera, and we're supposed to, I was role modeled that you're secondary. So seeing her not be secondary, I love it, but then I'm triggered by it. So it's been fascinating for me.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting, Lori, because I have 3 sisters who are very strong-willed. So I had the opposite, I think, almost, because I had a brother who I really didn't get along with. He was, again, this is why I'm really into Real Men Feel, because I'm a sensitive male, always kind of identified with, stereotypically, what they say, with the feminine side. I was always very emotional. My brother, not so much. My dad, definitely not so much, or at least they suppress that in themselves. I think all men have that potential. All human beings have a balance of the male and female, I believe. And I think that my sisters, though, my mother was very kind of weak-willed, or she really gave a lot of her power away, I should say. Not that she was weak, but she gave a lot of her power away to my father in a very horrible relationship that they had. But my sisters, I think, overcompensated with strength. We had definitely a very stereotypical Italian argumentative family growing up, and I had very strong females as far as my sisters. I have 2 older sisters, a younger sister. They didn't take crap from anybody. So that's interesting. So Hillary is not a shock to me. And I had aunts that were very strong-willed that I knew. I had an aunt that nobody knew until she died. She used to tell me dirty jokes when I was a kid. So she didn't care about any rules, anything. So, Hillary being strong, it's interesting because it never bothered me. And I kind of just expect women to have that capability. So it's interesting to hear that perspective from someone who had more males versus females in the family that they grew up with. So thanks for sharing that.
And you know, for me, I think a lot of the big emotions that have surfaced have had to do with the language of exclusion, the language of finding somebody else to blame, the language of scapegoating, if you will. That to me has been my biggest thing, and perhaps triggered the strongest emotional reactions for me, particularly having been grouped by society into a segment of society that has lots of letters associated. And it seems like the letters, we're choosing more letters of the alphabet. It started off with just LGBT, and then it's Q, then it's I, then it's A. And I think we'll probably appropriate every other letter in the alphabet except for S. So in the process of doing that, I was reminded and listening to a lot of the conversations and seeing videos of many of these rallies and just listening to all the stuff, I was reminded of two things. First of all, my experience, every time I would visit my brother who lives just outside of Washington, D.C., I would always go into D.C. and visit the Holocaust Museum. That's one of my favorite places to go. And I always thought that, you know, every member of Congress, every person who decides that they want to serve in a public capacity should be required to go to that museum and to be reminded of what can happen when you start singling out people and segments of the population and say, you are responsible. And you are somehow, you know, responsible for my life being miserable or my perception of life being miserable, even though if you really take a close look at it, it isn't. And so I was reminded of that experience, and I kept on drawing parallels between 1930s Germany and what's going on now. And again, these are just my thoughts, my feelings, and what was bubbling up for me. And I started thinking, you know, going to what Shauna said about me taking responsibility for me taking responsibility for my own emotions and so forth. I had to realize that one of the things that this election has done, it has amplified a very natural human tendency to want to look at what other people are doing and want obsessing about what other people are doing, and then somehow, you know, working ourselves up into a frenzy when in reality, if we really take a very close look at our lives and just ask ourselves, is what this other people are doing really affecting us? And 99.99% of the cases, no, they're not. And so it has been, to me, a great reminder that I'm responsible for myself. Now, the first principle of joy, you're not responsible for anybody else's happiness but your own. And by extension, nobody else is responsible for my life except for me. And so it has been a great reminder for me to just live the best life I can, to be the best person I can, to concern myself with just being freaking awesome. Because you know what everybody does in Washington, what everybody does in the State House, what everybody does in City Hall or whatever, ultimately is not going to have a huge impact on me, except, you know, if I need to know city services or something like that, perhaps. But I still live my life. I still go about it on a daily basis. So it's been good practice to switch off the TV, stop paying attention to everybody's, you know, opinions about this or that or whatever, and just remind myself, you know what? Let me focus on me. Let me worry about me. Let me be the best human being I possibly can, because that cumulative effect is going to have a much greater impact on the world than who we vote for or what emotions they trigger in us.
Cool. You know, there's one take I heard on this whole campaign early on that has really allowed me to just sit back and witness, and truly I just see the whole thing as entertaining. I haven't been triggered by any sides, but it was the notion that Trump is the old level of consciousness.
Yeah.
Right? It's that old, and it's rooted in survival, fear, us against them, blaming someone. And, you know, I remember living there. I remember there were plenty of things he said that, wow, I used to be for that. I think that was a great idea. So I can see that and feel it and accept it. And also that Bernie is the consciousness of where we're going. So he's a little bit ahead of the time, but that compassion, cooperation, society coming together is all where humanity's headed. And that Hillary is the bridge. Her current energy, that femininity with a very masculine edge to stand in her power, to get things done, right? To operate in the current political status, she has to be quite a lot of to be able to get things done. So she's this bridging energy But it's not about stupidity. It's not about ignorance, but it's fear and hope, kind of. And and to allow people to be there without judging them, that's the challenge I find.
Yeah, and that quote, the arc of history is long, but it tends towards justice, right? I mean, I feel like some of that energy, that old energy of the past that Trump represents, is the reason why the arc is so long, because fear, the human tendency, the naked ape, I call us. I mean, we are animals and we are angels. I mean, we're a combination of the two. And really, Trump represents that older mindset of that scapegoating and blame and fear. And it's that kind of mentality that human beings cling to that makes the arc, unfortunately, that much longer of history. But that's really great. I mean, equating the three figures.
Did you say that it tends towards justice?
Yes.
To me, that it stumbles rather awkwardly towards justice.
Yeah.
That's a great way of putting it.
Yeah.
No, it's. I'm finding I'm feeling really intrigued by this discussion, and a lot of the things that folks have said have had funny little resonances. My mother was born and raised in Tunisia, interestingly enough. And when the Americans had routed Rommel and kicked him out, the ovens had already been started to be built. They dug the ground and started building ovens. My mother's people were Jewish, and had Rommel cared more about Trumpian concerns than just winning the damn war, I, for one, might not be here. So your comment, Appio, about the Holocaust Museum is particularly moving. I grew up in Washington, but missed the Holocaust Museum and just haven't been able to bring myself to go. But I think you're absolutely right. Everyone who proposes to serve in national government should be obliged to visit, and the Museum of the American Indian, or I forget what it's called.
Yes.
So it's quite interesting because my wife is strong and my mother was strong, and I raised two strong daughters. And for me, the thing that frankly infuriates me about the dialogue that's been going on, particularly in the last segment of this election, is the extraordinary disrespect and the lack of the stinkiness of it, the injustice of it. I'm not sure I agree with you, Andy, about Hillary's masculineness. I think that to me is too easy and slippery a dichotomy to say, well, in order to be strong, a flavor of strength, and fight with me here. This is just my feeling about it as you were talking. The notion that for a woman to be able to make it in politics requires her to trade her femininity in some sort of a archetypal way for masculinity in some sort of an archetypal way doesn't seem quite right to me. At the beginning, when we were sort of setting up and straightening out our hair, the notion of goddess came up, and I think that for me, part of what I find astonishing about Bernie is not only his pointing towards hope, where Trump, I think you're absolutely right, Andy, points towards fear, but how feminine, in a certain way, Bernie is, in that depth of compassion, in that understanding of goddess energy, really, when you really think about it. I think that's what got a lot of young people charged up, because young people in particular aren't fixed, or tend not to be as fixed in their views. This is why, when I talk to my daughter, she's at Smith, and one of her good friends is transitioning, and now he's on his way to a new life, and it's like a non-issue. And so this is when we say kids are the hope for the future. This is precisely why. But what I find particularly interesting, and which I haven't been able to sort out either emotionally or mentally, is who exactly are the 41% or the 38% who are wildly enthusiastic about Mr. Trump and are going to vote for him no matter what. What in the hell is going on there? It's an absolute mystery to me. The tax thing and the Putin thing and the pussy grabbing thing, pardon my French, and all of the other ugly crap that our good friend Mr. Trump permits himself has zero effect on his constituency.
Yeah, and if I may, if I may jump in on that, yeah, I really don't. Again, I think Andy's got it right there. It's fear, and from my perspective, what really got under my skin was just how much. And again, I'm not picking on them in particular. The Democrats have their own little foibles, but for the Republicans, they're supposed to be the party of, and this is what really got me angry. They're supposed to be the party of personal responsibility. And just like Appio was saying, really live your life. I mean, yeah, sure. They just raised the taxes. They just raised the gas tax here in Jersey 23 cents. So that's kind of like the man sticking it to me. I got to pay 23 extra cents a gallon. But in the scope of my entire life, I mean, come on, is it crushing me? No. And I'm very fortunate to live in this country. I'm very fortunate to be here. We have it a lot better. And that's the thing. I don't understand. We can see African children instantaneously starving, and we can see the horror in Aleppo immediately, like on our screens, and yet we still don't have that perspective that, oh my God, I'm so fortunate. I should be so grateful for being here. So Ken, I mean, yes, I don't understand that in this world where, everyone's suffering outside of this country, we're so fortunate we don't appreciate that. And then, to have this fear that I think is feeding us, and it's just we're fed and we're triggered constantly by the 24-hour negative news cycle. And we're, like I said earlier, we're animals. And our ancestors were looking outside that cave waiting for a saber-toothed tiger, but now the saber-toothed tiger is everywhere and it's beaming at us from all of these devices we have. So we're constantly being triggered. Our fight or flight is always on. So we're always constantly, and so our fear mechanism is always being ignited. So that's the thing. It's like we're being fed this fear. So then to get elected, just like companies want us to buy their products and they have to tell us how essential they are to our lives, their products, we can't live without their products. Politicians are telling us, I'm the solution. You need to vote for me because I'm going to solve all your problems. They're selling themselves. So that's the thing, but they don't understand in the effort in selling themselves just to get in the office, they're leaving this stain and this indelible mark on our collective psyche of the country.
Well,
and it doesn't matter how they get in, it's just that they get in.
And if I can add to that, Anthony, I think that it's there. I once heard that fear is a weapon of dark forces used to keep us back, to bind us to the old ways. And I think that, what we're seeing is that, yes, there is this knight in shining armor appearance where it's like, I'm going to come save you. And it's kind of appeasing that most difficult part within people. What they're most afraid of is their shadow, right? It's that we're most afraid of our light, but it's like that biggest discomfort, the most painful part of us is that shadow of fear, and and to the point of it taps into our animalistic side. There is a physical effect of fear where it shuts down rational thinking completely. And it heightens the hindbrain, which is the reactive brain. And everything back there is about survival. It's about keeping us safe, keeping us, the ego has this hidden agenda of wanting to be right, of wanting to look good, of wanting to be impressive, not impressed, but impressive, right? It will go to no lengths to get what it thinks it needs for survival, which is about the physical experience, that animalistic experience. And what I do believe that we are really what we're looking at is how we are stepping even closer into another way of experiencing life, which is from our soul's perspective, the higher realm of or dimension of being, right? And we're asking to participate in this evolutionary process where together we can all say yes to what we desire, to that desire of Eden, right? We've been promised this concept of heaven on earth. What it takes is for people to wake up within each and every one of us and to recognize that which we are afraid of, is our own power.
Shauna, you touched on something really important there that I'd like to expand on a little bit further, and that is one of the great human needs that we have is the need to be heard. And one of the reasons why Mr. Trump is so appealing to so many people, no matter what he says, no matter what he does, no matter how horrible, people label all the stuff, people feel like when he hears them, the quote-unquote political class has not heard them, has basically said whatever it took in order to get elected, and then gone about and done their own things. And so people have reached the point now where it's like, at least he hears them. He says everything that they wants to hear because he's making all these promises. Whatever promise needs to be made, it's going to be said because they feel heard. And every time that you have had a country that has transitioned from a democracy to a dictatorship, it has been precisely that. The people have reached a point where they no longer feel heard by the representatives. And so they go along with that. And so Hitler did not actually win the elections. He actually was appointed because of the fear of his followers. He was appointed as the prime minister, and he took that as his opportunity to seize power. Hugo Chavez in Venezuela was elected on a wave of what people were feeling that they were not being heard. He was elected on a wave of resentment. And now Venezuela is practically collapsing around itself because of what happened. So every time that people listen to their fears and they feel like they aren't being heard, and this is a great wake-up call, honestly, in spite of all of the stuff that we just want to go and bury our heads in the sand. It's like, honestly, I really wanted to, become an ostrich and go and bury my head in the sand for a while so I didn't have to deal with all of this. And yet I've seen it as an incredible opportunity for us to wake up and say, we're not being heard. And there are politicians that are out there. There are members of the political class who are recognizing that and saying, we need to listen. So this has been good and blowing it up in so many ways, in spite of all of the stuff, all the shit that's come out, all that's bubbled up to the surface.
Well, listen, election day is still next week, so we don't know how it's really going to turn out yet.
Right. That's how we don't worry about this magical 41%. There's only one poll that matters, and it's actually underway with early voting.
Right.
There are things about Trump that I can admire and go, wow, he's really good at that. His self-confidence is amazing. And to come at it from a spiritual realm or a vibrational idea, he has a high level of wealth consciousness. So even when he's not a billionaire, he acts like a billionaire. Like his belief about himself and his wealth, however many bankruptcies he gets through, he's makes it back. So there's something attractive in that and powerful in that. And I think that's I've seen interviews with Trump voters that say, no, I don't think that'll happen. I don't think they don't believe a lot of things he says will actually happen, but they still somehow have more blind faith or trust in this outsider that, everything's a mess. I'm going to vote for this guy that'll mess it up even more.
And I have to say, I have a friend who's a huge Trump person. And she's it's not just that she's a huge Trump person, she just hates Hillary to pieces and is constantly putting negative things out. So I had posted something positive about Hillary, and she wrote this big, long litany of she should be in jail, the typical rant. And I wrote underneath it, I'm like, and I did it on Facebook, I said, this is my Facebook page, and I promise to honor your opinion on your page and not post anything about how I feel about your candidate. I said, but what I would like is for you to honor what I am for. Mm-hmm. And I have been very, very focused during this time to pay attention to not what I am against, but what I am for. Because what I am against brings up my fear.
Yeah.
And if I can focus on what I'm for, and only that, then I can let go of the anger. But I really want to tap in when you were talking about when Shauna, when you were just talking about that in Appio, the biggest thing I think that that Trump gives to his followers is they get to stay in victimhood. And that's what blame does. Blame takes away personal responsibility completely and makes it somebody else's fault that their life isn't the way they want it. It's the Mexicans' fault. It's the Muslims' fault. It's this one's fault. And as soon as we do that, we disempower ourselves, right? It's a complete disempowerment, yet it doesn't feel that way for them because it's, you know, they don't take on that responsibility. So when we go into the blame game, and we all do it as humans, right? Like we all have to catch ourselves, right? And like all of us here work in the self-growth field and healing ourselves. So we all know, like we have all that. But people who don't do it, and we know that that's 90+% of the world doesn't do this kind of work because it's so difficult. Because it's so difficult to go, oh, it's really not them, it's my crap coming up and I have to look at it, right? So, like, who the hell, I mean, let's face it, it's a lot of work to look at our stuff.
So, Lauren, can I ask you some, I have a couple of questions for you. I was really interested to hear, just this a moment ago, your friend enumerating all the ways in which Hillary should be put in jail and she's this, that, and the other. I have always been really astonished and shocked at how much hatred and invective she produces. And frankly, she's a standard establishment politician. If she were a man, all of the things that she's done and all of her transgressions would have been just part of being a politician.
Yes.
And yet, Benghazi, oh my God, it makes me dizzy to even think about it. Right. What do you think is going on there?
Well, it's sexism.
Right. Pure and simple.
I mean, that's it. I mean, in like what I was saying at the beginning, like, oh, Hillary was triggering me. Like I had my own issues with it, right? Yep. So instead of being like, she's evil because she's not doing it the most feminine way, right? Like she's not soft. And I don't agree with that. The more I watch her, the more I see that she is very soft.
Yeah.
And I think that is why she gets, you know, so much accomplished when she's actually in office. Whatever office she's been in, she's been able to cross boundaries of she's been very bipartisan. She's gotten people to work with her. She's gotten great things accomplished. But when she's running, like Andy's the one that found studies on this one, when she's running for a position or being put up for a position, all this animosity. But once she has the job, people support her. And the people who work with her, she gets a lot done. So I do think, you know, I think it's a perfect example. The whole Benghazi thing is the perfect example. During Bush's administration, there were 66 Americans killed in embassy attacks, and not one was investigated.
You know,
in Hillary, how many investigations have there been? And they basically said they've done it to smear her.
Right.
So it's definitely, I mean, there's no question in my mind, and I try not to go there too much because it can create so much animosity, to say that 90% of her accusations are based on sexism. And people
only 90? Only 90?
I think, well,
I'm being generous.
But you know, it's so hard because I really do think that if she was a man, nothing would be an issue. Bush, I mean, we know that he deleted 22 million emails, that Colin Powell ran on his own server, right? Like everybody has done this, but she, and that's the key, she is supposed to be above that behavior because she's a woman.
You know, I have to insert this in here really quick because I posed this in a blog, this question in a blog post. How has 30,000 deleted emails affected you personally? How has Benghazi affected you personally? Unless you happen to be a family member of the person, somebody who died in Benghazi, how has it affected you personally? How have all these issues that keep coming up affected you personally? They haven't.
It's made up.
They haven't.
And by the way, the wife of the ambassador who perished at Benghazi issued a statement categorically validating Hillary and invalidating all the BS.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So it's all, but it is, I really do. I'm sure, Shauna, you feel the same way. there are double standards. I actually was working with some attorneys a while back, and some female attorneys, and it was fascinating because what they said was the other female attorneys were worse than the men.
Mhm.
Like on trials, like the nastiness. And I finally asked the women outright, I said, were they worse, or did you perceive them to be worse because they were women saying the same thing as a man? And they all had to stop and go, oh my God. They had to like pull back, and they were like, you know what? You're right. They're not worse. We just expect better from a woman. And I was like, that is sexism.
Is it also?
Sexist? Sorry, Anthony.
No, I'm sorry. There's something I want to insert here. Is it also because women are supposed to have this role of the nurturer, and a woman who lets people die, oh, she failed as a nurturer? Like, is there something in there too? Maybe I want to get your thoughts. Is there something in there you think, is that possible that, a woman's supposed to be like the mother figure? So, she let her children die, which are the 4 soldiers and the ambassador and whoever else died in Benghazi. As a woman, you're supposed to be protector or nurturer. So if you let people die, or if you let this happen, or you're not supposed to be you're not supposed to be a betrayer, mommy. So you're not supposed to hide things from. What's that?
I
consciously, I was saying.
Yeah, I don't think it's all conscious behavior. Like, I don't think the sexism is conscious. I think it is a very deep-seated, listen, we've been a patriarchal society for a tad too long, okay? So, the majority of people that are on Trump's side are white males, right? They're in there. I think it's what is it? Like the 30 to or 40 to 60 range. Like, that's his primary people, right? White.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got some others, but his primary people are men, 40 to 60 years old. Hillary, if she's triggering people who are self-aware, and I like to think I'm not a sexist, and yet there I am, like, with all my own crap coming up. Imagine what she's doing to the people out there who are not self-aware. They are just triggered and reacting in the biggest, strongest, most powerful way of, she should die, right? Lock her up. I mean, these people are just like she hasn't been found guilty of anything, and they're like every Benghazi investigation has been found she's been innocent, yet they are still lock her up. So it's so incredibly
like you
eye-opening.
Eye-opening. They're stuck in the victimhood, and men of that age range are sort of my thing, and especially with Live the Hero. And from a hero perspective, the hero is the opposite of the victim. The hero in all the great mythologies was the person who rises above the fear and rises above the foibles of their culture and their time, and steps above and says, you know what, like Appio said, I'm taking on my responsibility. I'm taking on personal responsibility. Well, I'm rising above. I'm not a victim. And that's what I really worry about. And I really feel like, though, a lot of us are responsible for the unheard. I mean, we're not reaching out to them. I think I like to take responsibility on myself for those who maybe we've ignored. And I know, listen, I've belittled the stereotype of the hillbilly in my own life. I've belittled that, and who hasn't among us? Who hasn't kind of come down on the uneducated or the lower educated or the lower classes at certain times and done a hillbilly joke? So any of those religious people that are very fundamentalist and zealous about their religion, have we kind of ignored and belittled them too much? Have we sort of marginalized them because they're kind of kooky? I think we all have at some point, so we're all sort of to blame. And to me, I really feel like I do need to be my brother's keeper, literally, and I need to maybe start being more tolerant myself. So that's something that I really realized about myself this whole campaign cycle, to look at the Trump supporters and say, what separates me from them, and what have I done to help them gain that consciousness that they need to rise above those challenges? I've made too many hillbilly jokes. I admit it. I've made redneck jokes. I mean, it's just, you can't, and I've made too many. I used to be, I was raised Southern Baptist, and I saw those kind of mentalities where it was just fear motivated religion, quote unquote, And, instead of belittling them, I think I take responsibility that I need to go reach across that border and say, I'm sorry for making fun of you, and let's bring you back into the fold. And
Can I just tap in? Anthony, I love that reflection about how you're asking yourself how you contributed. I found that this whole experience has caused me to stop and check myself in that moment I'm about to either, in my head or with words, say something that used to be funny, acceptable. And I think now it's no longer acceptable because it's kind of now shown me what I shouldn't tolerate that anymore. If I can't tolerate in others, I'd be out of integrity if I were to tolerate it with myself, accept it with myself.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate that reflection. And the other piece of good, I know that Appio and Anthony, we've talked about like what good comes out of it. I've never seen so many people coming together for a cause, and especially as right now as it relates to women and women's rights. I'm really inspired by how it's just like, we're now as examples for younger women, we have this like opportunity to show women what we will and will not allow. And I think that it's great to see that something good came out of it already. And it hasn't even been finalized. Who cares who's going to be the president at this point? There are good things happening because of it right now. Lots of change.
Very much.
Right.
Very much. In fact, I would say, go out and vote. Absolutely go out and vote. But if you want to live in a world that you love, ignore the politicians, ignore the news, ignore anything that doesn't feel good, and just focus on you. Do what brings you joy. Love yourself. And just be an effing awesome human being. Everything else is really a distraction, if you really think about it.
Yeah. And another way to look at this that I like to look at it, instead of going, oh my God, there's 41% or whatever the number is that agrees with this, horrible viewpoints or whatever, or divisiveness, to again, soften it and just realize, wow, 41% of America feels that out of love with themselves and with life, and feels trapped in victimhood and feels like no one's listening to them. And, how do we fix that? Because there's not a vote. There's not a politician that can fix that. I mean, that's coming together at a whole different level, and really a mass healing. And again, just everyone doing their best to work on themselves and see what's reflected back. But also realize the people that aren't aware of that, they're not ill, they're not wrong, they're not broken. They're just where we used to be. I know it's not where I used to be. I can say that for sure. But everyone's path, everyone's timing is all different.
Mm-hmm. Andy, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because when we talk about personal responsibility and all these things, it can seem almost overwhelming. And a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, I have to look at my crap and everything else. And as I have been going on my own path of self-discovery and so forth, one of the things I realized was that personal responsibility doesn't have to be something onerous. It doesn't have to be something ugly or painful or anything like that. It can be as simple as deciding right now, what am I going to do that feels good for me right now? What feels best right now? And so when looking at all this stuff, when doing the self-examination and everything else, I found that it doesn't have to be painful. It doesn't. Yes, I've experienced a lot of pain, but in the process of experiencing all the pain, you make all the discoveries at the same time, and it's just a human tendency for that to come up. It's part of our experience. It's part of how we grow and learn and so forth. But and speaking strictly for me and my own observations and discoveries, it's just a matter of so simple. We discount it. We don't look at it. Because it is, okay, what am I going to do right now that feels good for me right now? What feels better right now? And so, when we're looking at the election and looking at and all these emotions and everything else, what feels better right now? Switching off the TV and walking the dog? Or sitting there and stewing in that toxic brew that's spewing out of the television or off the internet or wherever else that we're getting it from,
And for me, what I did like what shifted mostly for me in this, like what Anthony was saying earlier, was I decided to only post anything for what I am for. Like nothing about what I disagree with. So when someone would say, well, why are you voting for her? I can say, this is what I believe. This is what I want. And I believe she's going to do this. So it wasn't what he's not going to do, you know, because I posted something about, you know, I posted something about it on somebody else's site. Like I said, I'm focusing on just what I'm for. And somebody wrote underneath it, I'm for Hillary going to prison, haha, right? And I was like, yeah, ha ha ha, right? So, and I get, like, I wrote back and I went, yeah, that's not really funny. Because I don't find it funny any more than I think, you know, like I'm doing my best not to be like, what is wrong with Donald Trump that he won't show anyone his taxes? Mm-hmm. Like, what's wrong with, you know, like, what is he afraid of? Like, you know, like I'm trying
That's
not
actually a good question.
Right. But I'm trying really hard. Like when I see, like, he's the best thing. And what I'm realizing is what you guys were talking about earlier is he's an outsider. Although he's not really. He's been very involved in the political world for a long time financially. But everybody views him as the outsider, and they're so sick of what's been going on in Washington, D.C., that it seems like it doesn't matter how bad the outsider is. It's just that he's an outsider. And so that's a little scary, and it is that not being heard and nothing getting really accomplished, the gridlock that has been for the last 8 years in DC. There's nobody's happy with what's going on, so bring in someone who's really going to shake it all up,
or burn it all down.
Right.
Whatever it takes, right?
And that's sort of, but I think what it is so many people are so sick of what's going on that they don't care if it blows everything up in order to rebuild it. And I think when I look at it that way, because my friend that I was saying, she's a relatively intelligent human being. And she's all for him because he's an outsider. That is her biggest reason for voting for him. So the day he said he could stand in front and shoot somebody in New York City and his followers would still follow him, he's right. Like, it's come out that he's a sexual predator and they're completely ignoring it. He was absolutely right. And it is, I'm quite convinced, because he is the outsider.
The perceived outsider. Exactly.
Right. But
well, maybe your friend feels that she herself is an outsider. And maybe that's the resonance that she's feeling with Trump. The story that he tells and the reality that he is are two different things.
Right. Mm-hmm. But he's got them, like Andy said, he's got them convinced, right? Like, I mean, he has sold his story so well.
They were ready to be convinced, though.
Yes, they were. And I do think that was because they are sick of, I mean, who amongst us isn't sick of the gridlock that has been Washington, D.C. for especially the last 8 years, right?
Especially the last 8, yeah.
But, I mean, it's been progressively getting worse. I joked years ago, you know, when Ted Kennedy passed and Byrd and all those do you remember all those old guys, the old Democrats and the old Republicans? And I was like, this is going to be the new wave. It's going to be so much better. And I realized those men actually compromised and got things done. Mm-hmm. They might not have liked everything, but they worked together. And what's happened now is you have this side, and there's no compromise. There's no, and that's what, I mean, we have it on the big level because I believe, right, the macro and the micro, they follow each other. Like, is it like that in your local community? Because my guess is it's happening in the local community and it's showing up in the big government. There's no working together, but there isn't anywhere. It's so contentious everywhere. It's like my side, your side. There's no we anymore. So I think that's really showing up in the very public election process.
And I think you're absolutely right, Lori. And I think what I find particularly puzzling is how much the last 8 years are informing this election cycle. So not only did our friends across the aisle do every conceivable miserable trick to stymie Obama's agenda, nevertheless, they were less freaked out about electing a black man than people are now freaked out about electing a woman.
Oh, well, yeah.
So there's this extraordinary kind of collision of racial discomfort with gender discomfort. I mean, it's just baffling because, I mean, Indira Gandhi, Golda Meir, Benazir Bhutto, Margaret Thatcher, Corazon Aquino, they've all been heads of government they've done some good stuff, they've done some terrible stuff. What's the big deal?
Right.
And I think it's really ironic that most of these women heads of state that you cited, the majority of them were actually in Islamic countries that supposedly suppresses women all so much. But yeah, I mean, to your point, there have been studies that have shown that this is less about the stories that are being told by politicians and by the news media about these are marginalized people, and it boils down to this election has been about racism. There's been a huge influx of racism in the past 8 years. And, it serves us to recognize that. But more so, I think it serves us to recognize, our own personal responsibility, or just looking at bringing it back, full circle to not only our reactions and our emotions that are coming about, but what are we personally doing? What are we individually doing to, for ourselves to just make our little pocket of the world, this little bubble right here, a little better?
So what do you propose, Apio?
My own proposal is focus on being, like what I said earlier, and I'm going to keep on hammering away at it.
Yeah.
Best human being you possibly can.
That's a good mantra.
Yeah. Be the
That's
best
a good
human
mantra.
being you know how to be.
Yeah.
Well, I've always said we get the leaders we deserve.
Yep.
And whatever happens, it's true. And
Yep.
we'll adjust. Things will happen. Things won't happen. But
We'll learn.
yeah. And one thing that's always kind of triggered me, I can't say always, because I used to identify myself as a Republican, a conservative, but it's also a time when I thought I sucked and living sucked and the world sucked. But as I grew out of that, I realized the definition of conservatism is resistant to change. Wanting things to stay the same. And that's not how the universe works. So everyone could identify as conservatives and vote for conservatives, and still things would unfold and expand and change.
And we could have a whole nother show about how, the neuroscience behind, the resistance to change and so forth.
So maybe that's it. There's 41% of Americans that are just so scared and resistant to change that anyone that says, I can take us backwards, gets all their votes.
Right.
As if there ever was a golden age. I'm sorry.
Right, because there wasn't. Well, there was for white males. Let's be perfectly honest. The 50s and early 60s were brilliant for white males.
And the 40s and the 30s and the 20s.
Yes. In this country, being a white man has always been the way to go. So when...
Straight white man.
Right.
Thank you. I was going to add that, but I didn't want to be the one to bring it up.
Yeah, absolutely. So when now, so first you have a black man in office, and forget that he's half white, right? We always forget that his mother is white, but he doesn't look it, so he isn't.
Right.
Well, just remember the racial descriptor from the 2 centuries ago, 1 drop of black blood was sufficient to be black.
That's right. Very
Whereas curiously, in other countries, like in Latin America, oh no, I take it back. In South Africa, 1 drop of white blood would make you at least colored.
Right.
So back in the good old apartheid days, that magical drop of white blood would somehow lessen the pollution of blackness. Oh, sorry, that's a tangent. But it's just so
rabbit hole.
But it's fascinating to be able to step into it, right? And as much as I love Apio's concept of be the best that we can be right now, I love that, and I think it's hugely important. But I also think sticking our head in the sand is what creates genocide.
I agree. I
So
wholeheartedly agree.
there is a fine line between being the best that we can be and ignoring abuses. So,
Right.
so we have.
Amen to that. Amen to that.
Exactly.
So that is like one of the bigger, it is a huge concern because I'm not a big fan of putting on the news. It does trigger me. And then sometimes I don't want to dig in and go, what's that about, Lori? Sometimes I just don't want to do that. So,
Understandably.
right. So, but
Yeah.
there is that, gosh, I do want equal rights for people. I don't want people to be oppressed.
Mhm.
So is being the best me, for me, it's standing up and saying what I'm for.
Yes.
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 That's a part of what I'm doing. Like, it's not
Right.
going against something. It's going like, I'm for this. So how much energy can I put into this movement for equality as opposed to I'm just going to stand here and complain about the person who's trying to create inequality.
That's one of the reasons why I adore you so much, Lori, is because you're able to expand and say the things that I've left unsaid, and we've done this so many times with each other. So thank you for that. Thank you for adding to that.
Yeah, and I think Appio is tapping into that, what everyone's kind of been saying, that we're not putting a lot of work into ourselves. A lot of people just don't have the tools, and I think that's what all of us are trying to help people do in our own professions and our own daily lives. And that's part of being the hero. The hero, really, in the classic definition from all mythologies around the world, is the hero didn't just go out for self-aggrandizement. The hero didn't go beyond the pale and leave society just to gain wisdom for themselves. The hero went back and came back from a perilous journey, was one of the few who could rise above their fears and the limitations of their culture and come back from the darkness outside of the village with wisdom for everybody, not just for themselves. So the real definition of a hero is not a sacrifice. I mean, I know we glorify people who kind of go and sacrifice their lives, and rightly so. That's the type of heroism when you sacrifice your life unintentionally as a soldier, for instance, or as a first responder. But the real hero is the one that comes back and every day kind of rises above the limitations of their culture and supports the world and the people around them by feeding into them positively rather than making redneck jokes like I was lamenting earlier, and rising above your own limitations and then supporting the world around you and the people around you, even if they have different opinions, because they probably need it more than anyone else. So
cool.
Yeah.
Cool. We've been going for over an hour now, so I do kind of want to bring this and wrap it up. One thing that I do hope is changed forever in all elections is the notion that someone has to pretend they're perfect, and that this first skeleton, the first old tape, the first misstep, and they drop out. And that's what politicians have done for a long time. The first, oh, they got me, or that affair, or that thing I did 20 years ago, and Trump's blown through all that. So I hope that stays, right? So with that, I want to thank everyone for joining me tonight. I hope that this hopefully unique take on this unique election brought some insights, brought some awareness. That's the real goal here. Again, thanks to all my guests for joining. Thanks for all the listeners. Appio, thank you as always. You can join us live next Tuesday, November 8th at 8 p.m. Eastern for another episode of Real Men Feel. Appio and I will be sharing more about our experiences in men-only groups. We're calling it Being a Man Among Men. That's next week. Until then, subscribe at iTunes, give us a review, share what you thought about the show, join us on Facebook, join us all over the social media stratosphere, and please do vote.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Thank
No
you,
matter
everybody.
for who, vote.
Bye-bye.
It's so good to see y'all.